is when people start understanding that the prices are increasing and what they have in the hand today or in the hand or in the savings account is not gonna buy the same things in the future. That currency that they have, it becomes like a hot potato. And it's getting warmer and warmer, and as more people start getting this perception, you get a critical mass of people where things start developing faster. All these measures with money printing, and then we have discussions about universal basic income, paying people for staying home. That will lead to this process being accelerated. It's hard to say exactly when will happen because it's a matter of achieving that critical mass of public perception that, okay, it's not worth saving the money.
Thanks for watching this RTD interview. Don't forget to pick up your RTD Scary George round. Now enjoy this interview. Welcome to another RTD interview. Today I'm excited to have a returning guest, Mr. Iustin Rosioara. He's an author, a monetary enthusiast, as well as a person who's lived through some very tough times with his prior experiences in a lot of communist countries. And I thought, what better person to have on than someone who can share with us, actually based upon some prior writings in relation to the environment we're in today. So, Iustin, welcome back to RTD Interviews.
Thank you, Mike. I'm very excited to be with you today. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you taking time for me. I was excited to connect with you again. It's been a while, but yet never could have been more important than right now, given the fact that we're hearing so much about inflation. And so I remember when we spoke years ago, there was no mainstream subject matter on inflation. And we all know that inflation has been extremely higher than what the CPI and all the government numbers would like us to believe. But now, for whatever reason, it's a mainstream subject matter. So I want to dive into it and give the viewers a chance to hear about real life events and how you navigated through some troubled waters yourself in the past. And this happens to be in regards to this book here, which is Inflation and Deflation, Common Sense Answers to Everyday Questions. And in the back of the book, you actually give some detailed insight into your experiences dealing with high inflation. And so I want to just jump off with that. You know, this current environment we're in now with inflation, give us your 2 cents on the level of inflation we're experiencing now and where you think it's heading. And then we'll dive into more of the, extreme situations that you've experienced.
Well, right now we know that the level of price increase is not in near 2% because we go daily to the grocery store and we hear all kind of stories about lumber prices, about construction prices, about different materials, about different commodities. So we know that probably it's much higher depending on how these price increases are calculated, how the CPI is, what is included and what is excluded, and there are all kinds of methods to alter the end result. But the fact is that we are probably around 10%, somewhere there in price increases, year-to-year basis. So this is what we have to deal with. This is where I think we are now. And there are different people who have different methods of calculating this. But this is what I feel, what I kind of notice.
Right. All right, and I'd agree. And so basically, we have two different sources that I always refer to during my interviews, and it happens to be the Chapwood Index by Ed Budkowski, who's a former person I had on the show. He tracks major metropolitan areas, and it was already 9, 10, 11 in a lot of the major metropolitan areas. And then we have John Williams from Shadow Stats, who always says 7, 8, 9%. So it's always been high, but yet the mainstream narrative has always been they're trying to find 2%. And then Jerome Powell, as of recently, the last couple of years, has been very blunt with the fact that they're looking to overshoot it now. They want to overshoot it to catch up and make up for prior years of them not being able to find it. And, of course, John Williams points out that in 1981, 82, when they officially changed the mechanisms inside the basket, as you just hinted at, that's when everything started trending downward. And, of course, it's going to be hard to find what you're looking for if you change the rules of the game. And so the rules of the games have been changed. And based upon what we're experiencing now, will it be an accelerated rate to what true discovery of inflation will be, or will it still will they be able to get away for some time with this fake narrative of 2%, 2.2, 5% as of last month? Will they be able to hide this for much longer?
I think it's a matter of public perception at the end, because inflation has been traditionally defined as increase of money supply. Lately, the definition was changed. So it was the previous definition was increase of money supply leading to price increases. Now inflation is defined as price increases attributed to money supply. So actually cause and effect are changed. And it's very convenient, because if you define inflation as increase of money supply, then it's on the shoulders on the central banks. But if you define price increases as inflation, then it's the merchants and it's the business people who increase the prices. So it's actually blaming the wrong people. But coming back to the issue is, another thing that I could say is, a price is always a number. So you cannot inflate a number. You can increase it or decrease, but you cannot inflate. So to me, it makes much more sense to define inflation as the volume or the mass or the volume of the money supply, because that can be inflated. You cannot inflate a number. And I think that at the end it's a matter of public perception, and this is probably we're going to talk a little bit more, is when people start understanding that the prices are increasing, and what they have in the hand today, or in the savings account, is not gonna buy the same things in the future. They start perceiving that that currency that they have, it becomes like a hot potato, and it's getting warmer and warmer. And as more people start getting this perception, you get a critical mass of people when where things start developing faster. Yeah. And another thing that, because I read a lot about comparison made to the 70s here in the States, of course I was not here, but you read stories and how the difference in different stores, they were, it was those price labels attached to the same can boxes or products, especially those products that had a longer shelf life. It was like 3-4 labels on top of each other, because they were just walked around and increased the prices, putting new price labels. I think that this time things are going to develop much faster, because we have all these technologies. All they need to do is to in a store, they just have to update the price in the computer system somewhere back of the house, and so technology makes this process to be accelerated. Yeah. So that's what I think.
So it makes it a lot easier to cover up the actual sticker price of things, because nowadays, especially here in America, we have these huge, grocery chains, so the stores are huge. So I don't really see the employees going around sticking new stickers, right in front of the items on the shelf, like, to replace the outdated price if it gets to that point. And so in your opinion, is that inevitable? Like, based upon history, based upon the trajectory where we're at now and the perceived number of inflation they're telling us in comparison to what's real, is that something we should actually see in the short-term future, the actual sticker price of things starting to really show up even more so?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. I mean, it's given the, all these measures with this money printing, and then we have discussions about universal basic income, paying people for staying home, and so that will lead to this process being accelerated. So I think it's inevitable. It's right now. Imagine that you see now hiring or help wanted signs everywhere, and businesses are struggling. And of course, when you have the government that pays people to stay home, why would people go to work? So that makes that, people who go to work, who choose to go to work, they have to be paid more in order to do that. So that will accelerate the process. And I think it's hard to say exactly when will happen, because it's a matter of achieving that critical mass of public perception that, okay, is not worth saving the money. And it can also be related to to confidence, regain confidence, because people went out, now start to go out, they are allowed to go out spending money, and that increases that money velocity. So, but if it's inevitable, yes, I definitely believe it's inevitable.
Yeah.
We'll see that happening.
And one of the things I want to actually just dive into now, because I think a great segue would be, currently we're experiencing the world reserve currency, and you say, critical mass of perceived perception of the purchasing power. And so ultimately everything boils down to purchasing power. What can you purchase now in comparison to what's going to be available in the future, and the lack thereof because of the destruction of national currencies? And so the dollar is the Federal Reserve note, is the world reserve currency. And to my knowledge, let me know if I'm wrong, because you're a study of history. Have we ever witnessed a reserve currency, globally recognized, used by everybody on the planet in some capacity, be weaponized to the point where it is being destroyed intentionally? Because most of the times that we're familiar with are isolated events where it's low domestic currencies, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, currencies that only affected those few million people, not billions of people. So give me your thoughts on how this dollar impact will cause problems. And then we're going to dive into some of the experiences you've had directly on the ground with more smaller domestic currencies and during your experiences with high inflation.
So what happens is that when people start losing confidence in the currency they are using on a daily basis, they will look for other forms of money or value that can be preserved over time. So so they will start migrating, start using any form of exchange that is possibly available, sometimes maybe illegal even, just to get rid of the currency they hold in hands and look into other forms. So like back in Eastern Europe where I grew up, we had dollars, and it was Deutschmark as well at that time, and then euros came in. So these were perceived as kind of an anchor, something that would stabilize the value. So that was kind of the baseline. Everything, people were starting to negotiate high value items or long-term contracts and things like that in these hard currencies. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, coming back to your question, is, okay, what will happen when we see that what was perceived as hard currency is devaluating at an accelerated rate? I don't think we have an experience like that in the history. And of course, you know my position, being a gold bug. I look at precious metals as gold and silver as being that anchor that people will look at. How far are we in the process? I'm not very sure. There is a lot of discussion about, a lot of the debt that other nations have that is denominated in US dollars, and that will create a future demand for dollars. The question is, okay, if those debts are paid back, because what has been all the time or during the last decades, it was always these countries could borrow dollars to replace all the debts. Well, what will happen when they will not want to? So there will be a demand for a while, yes, for the dollar to repay the debt. But what will happen with those dollars that are repaid? Where will they come? Where will they go? Is it kind of a what's the wording is? The chicken come back to roost or something like that. Yeah. So will it hit back when all those dollars that are now circulating across the world will come back to the United States? So it's I'm not very sure how this will develop, but I don't see any other way of developing, because that's kind of a logical way to see at this. And I'm not aware of any reference in the past where you had something global that is under attack as it is the US dollar right now.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that question was just because it just further highlights how we're all dealing with something that has never been experienced in human history. You know, there's been devaluations, there's been hyperinflations, there's been currency crashes, resets. We've gone through several different reserve currencies at this point. I think the Federal Reserve note is probably the longest tenured reserve currency to date, and it's going to be interesting days ahead. But I want to actually have you share with the audience a little bit of your experiences. So as I was going through the book here, and so you mentioned, you know, Romania, Poland, Russia, and Hungary, where you've all had direct experience with, and
Yes.
the extreme inflation, it says, from anywhere to 10% to over 300%. Give us a little bit of that, what that looked like in the midst of all that. Assume a lot of the similarities of what we're experiencing now. Give us some stages as to how it built up to the where it just broke, and then how did they rebuild and recover from some of those events?
Well, I think that so the whole, you know, it starts slowly until it starts developing, and I mentioned earlier a little bit earlier about this critical mass. So people start perceiving that, you know, prices increase, and, you know, 10% per year doesn't sound like a terrible loss of purchasing power. But if you think that in 7 years, actually, you lose half of that purchasing power. If the price increases go to 20%, then in 4 years, you lose half of the purchasing power. So, you know, it's the famous rule of 72, where you divide the inflation 72 by the inflation, and it tells you how many years it takes to have your loss of purchasing power to a half of what was originally. So you don't need to have those extreme inflation numbers like 200% to have your savings completely vanished. It's just a matter of time of how quickly things develop, but it starts slowly, and as the people see prices increase, and then they understand that, okay, I'm not able to do the same thing as I was able to do last year, and then they will demand more from the employer. Then employers will say, okay, I'm gonna hire someone else. I'll be willing to give either increase the wages and or hire someone else at higher wages, because, you know, in an environment like that, employees have maybe better options. So that generates wage increase, that generates costs, and that's kind of a spiral that goes on and on and on. But at the end, the employees are the ones that are the most affected, because the prices increase first before they get adjusted their salaries or wages or their payments. So for every year that goes, that gap widens, and at the end, if prices start to move much faster, then everything completely disappears from the hands of everybody. I mean, and they just treat, you know, what was $100, let's say, some years ago. If we go back to here in the States, $100 would probably pay a meal for 4 people in a nice restaurant. Now probably with $100 you can pay for a good meal for 2. And you know, a few years down the road, if things go on, you'll be able to buy 1 meal with $100, and at the end you'll buy a burrito at one of the fast food joints
Wow.
with $100.
Yeah. So just hearing that, you know, example of how inflation in real world is far. And I remember very well when I was a lot younger, you know, my metric was a $20 bill. Like being a, you know, young kid, you know, you take $20, I could literally put some gas in my car and be able to get myself a meal, and then have a little left over to get me a movie as well for $20. And so I'm like, wow, like $20 now is literally a half a tank of gas. There's no movie, there is no meal. And so that's just, you know, real world evidence of how over time, because of the way the system is set up, and that's where all the countries that you've experienced, the government extremely indebted, using the central bank as a crutch to funnel in fresh currency and fresh reserves. And the people closest to the spigot, as I always say, benefits first, are the people who save and invest in that currency. Unless they're taking advantage of the opportunity at hand, they typically be savers, and they are the ones that are losing out. So in environments where there's extreme inflation, savers, retirees, you know, and all those countries that you referenced, give us a little bit of the experiences from what you've known, maybe family members or friends that, you know, suffered during those times.
Yeah, you know, I can use just some numbers. When I graduated from university, you know, as an engineer, young engineer, I had my basic salary was 2,500 in local currency. It was a monthly salary, take home pay. 1 year later, that was exactly the year when communists fell. So the new government, they wanted to be kind to the people, so they started to bring all kind of benefits, and benefits in form of money. And 1 year later, not more than 18 months, a monthly salary was around 10,000. So actually it went from quadrupled from 2,500 to 10,000 in 1 year. But the prices increased as well. And it created a lot of discrepancies, because some of the old prices, people had payments for their apartments that were kind of a fixed rate, interest rate. So they have the same amount to be paid. So that came into their advantage. But otherwise, the people who had their apartments paid off, or who they were renting, and now suddenly they had to rent on the open market, they suffered because they didn't have the same benefits. And then jumping ahead in 2000, then I was away for a few years from Romania. I came back and started a food business. At that time, a monthly salary was around 3 million in local currency. So you can imagine from 2,500 in 1990, when I graduated, to 2000, it was a monthly salary. It was around 3 to 4 million. So you can imagine those.
So 3 to 4 million in dollar terms is roughly how much? In
well, it was probably $100.
$100. So,
yeah.
Okay, so a monthly salary was about $100.
Yeah.
Okay.
And but if you think back in communist time, when I graduated, right after graduation, those 2,500 were around $60.
Okay.
So in terms of dollars, the prices, I mean, the payments, the salaries increased, but the prices of the goods that we had to buy increased faster. So now, if we go to Romania, every salary is probably 600-700 euros, dollars, somewhere there. And but many of the things that people have to purchase, they have the prices are equal with the prices that we pay in Western Europe or in the States.
So that means automatically it's extremely expensive.
Yeah,
Europe itself has never been
things
cheap.
become very expensive. Exactly why because of the fact that prices increase first, and the wages increase after.
Prices first, wages afterwards, and by that point it's too late for the average person. And then at that moment, in between that time frame there, as all that's happening, that's when they realize, hey, something's wrong here. Like what's going on here? Because they're starting to feel the squeeze and the pinch from just the environment, the financial environment they're in. And so I know amongst all that, you know, Gretchen's law kicks in, where bad money or good money drives out bad money. And so people realize, hey, let's get rid of these things. Like, you know, something's wrong with my currency. Let me get dollars, or let me get. And so in this current environment, a lot of the world still is going to dollars because their currencies are doing a lot worse. But here in America, we can't run the dollars because dollars is in the same type of boat here. And so there's the advention of BTC, Bitcoin. And so El Salvador just recently made it a legal tender. And so is that a sign of the free market demanding something new? Or what are your thoughts about that?
I didn't look very close to to what's happening over there. So let's say give the benefit of the doubt that this is a genuine desire from the politician, the president, or whoever took initiative to introduce that, to give to people an alternative. I know they already use dollars on a large scale. So best case is just a genuine desire to help people to have the possibility to accumulate some form of assets that is more desirable than what is used in the country. Mm-hmm. And worst case, of course, this can be just a game, just a test, just to see how things are developing. What is the market reaction? Will the population adopt it? How quickly? We understand that this is definitely not a rich country. People struggle a lot financially in that country. So it's going to be interesting. It's definitely a new move. It's a bold move, and will be interesting to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I'd agree. And that's where I personally, I've always been a skeptic, just because it's not by coincidence, I think, that this new form of technology happens to be introduced at the same time the global banks, central banks, were looking to take us solely digital anyway. I believe it plays into their push to go to the CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And it's just too timely for me to just settle for that it's here to save humanity, where gold and silver has always been the primary anchor of price stability, as well as purchasing power. So, but looking ahead, given the current environment we're in now, I'd imagine pretty soon, if not already, and what we can learn from prior experiences of extreme inflation, borderline hyperinflation, things called black markets, where the government paints them as being these dark and dirty alleys where people do illegal things, but it's just a natural response towards people looking for options to be able to conduct business on the surface or underneath, but yet they're trying to survive. So can you see a time where the black market, or if you have another name that you might want to use, it sounds cleaner, the clean market or whatever, takes surface to where we, the people, realize that might be the best option for us, as far as not necessarily relying upon going through the banking system, as well as using, fiat currency, CBDCs. We rather use gold, silver, or whatever other mediums. Do you see that becoming something that can be accepted amongst the Western Hemisphere?
I think accepted. I think, let me put it in this way. I think United States is in a very privileged situation that we have. It's not called the Union of the American States. It's called the United States of America.
Right.
So we have different states that they can adopt different legislation regarding what is called legal tender, what is acceptable. But so that's one thing that is good in here in the States, that different states can adopt different rules. At the same time, regardless, people always find ways to circumvent the system. If it's, I used to say that if currency is perceived as a hot potato, it's gonna be hot even if you take it out from the fridge. This is the general perception, and then they will do whatever is necessary to find form of barter through silver, through coins, through gold will probably be very, very valuable. It is anyway too valuable for everyday transaction. It doesn't make any sense to use gold for everyday transaction. But otherwise, they will find form of exchanging services, different ways of compensation, and it doesn't mean that we'll go back to barter, but it means that people always find ways around it. And just going back to this idea with universal basic income and people being paid for sitting at home, we may see, if this would continue, we may see a lot of under the table work done, or a lot of services or work that is done and be paid under the table, because the people will say, thank you for the government check, but then I don't want to sit at home and play video games, I can do some things so I can make some extra cash. So the question is, what will be those form of compensation? And people will always find ways around it. And another thing that I want to highlight is that whatever form of control is imposed, they don't work very well. And they may sound on paper, but people are very creative to find ways to circumvent. Like, for instance, when we were back in communist times, it wasn't a fixed exchange rate. The dollars, a dollar was so and so many Romanian lei, it was like 20. And but the black market price was 70 to 80. So actually what people were doing, tourists who came into the country legally, tourists coming from Western Europe, they would buy things or bring jeans or things that were valuable and desirable for us who didn't have access to buy those things in the store. And then they would basically sell that in local currency at that black market exchange rate. So there are ways to navigate around it. And another thing is that even if price controls were enforced, like for instance, in the market, we had small farmers who would bring and sell their products. They tried to enforce price controls. So what happened is that they would come with their small trucks and sell the vegetables from the trunk around the corner somewhere. And of course, if the police came to grab them, worst case was that, the police, they needed vegetables themselves. So they would take a bag of vegetables to take home. So every form of imposing controls will lead to a reaction. And this can be very hardly enforced because many of the things that are desirable are desired also by the people who are supposed to enforce the things, right. the controls.
Wow.
So there is always a way around it.
Yeah.
And people will find, it may be silver coins, it may be some other things that people will exchange of services of some form, or some other goods that people will develop a way to exchange.
Yeah. Well, as we get ready to draw towards the end of our discussion, I want to get, the problems are obvious. We've covered a lot of those. And so solutions, some things that you can share with people who have not lived through extreme inflation environments that can probably be helpful. Of course, we don't get gold and silver. Is there anything else that you would say can help people get, be one step ahead of the coming days of extreme inflation, if not hyperinflation on this side of the planet?
I think, in order to understand inflation, you need to understand two things, and how to deal with inflation. You need to understand first the concept of real interest rates, mm-hmm. which is actually the nominal interest rate minus the inflation. So if let's say that I put my money in the bank and I get hypothetically 5% on my deposit. We don't get that, but let's say to use a number, and the inflation is 5%, that means that actually I'm at zero because I get 5% on my deposit, but if I subtract the inflation of 5%, it brings me back to zero. So this is the first thing. We need to understand the real interest rate. And if I can get on my deposits 5%, but the inflation is 10%, I actually lose 5% of my purchasing power. Mm-hmm. So for savers, this is very bad. For borrowers, the situation is opposite. So here's what I'm saying. It's important to have a source of income that it's easy to adjust to the inflation rate, number one. Number two is it also advantageous to borrow if the real interest is negative. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, borrowing puts you in a very vulnerable situation. You should have enough reserves in a very liquid form that will allow you, if things turn very bad, you are able to pay that loan very fast. So let's say that you run a business, you can buy a business, or let's use the example of real estate, because real estate is very illiquid if the market is bad. So you can borrow at a low interest rate. Inflation is high, so it puts you in a very good situation. But what happens if you have to pay off that mortgage that you have on that real estate? Then you need to have some other form of reserves that immediately when that request comes, you say, okay, here is, I pay off the debt and I'm out of it. Mm-hmm. But that is one thing that can be done, that you have to look for some form of income generating assets that will generate a return higher than the rate of inflation. And it's normally, given the situation we're in now, basically it's just running your own business is the only possibility to have some form of business where you can put some expenses, deduct some expenses, and also deduct that interest rate that you're paying for borrowing. The second thing is, of course, you have to be protected, and we discussed a lot about the protection, about the precious metals. The precious metals, yeah, we understand the prices are manipulated. We have this spot price that is not relevant for the physical, but this is still leading the market of precious metals. But precious metals over time always deliver a form of protection over a long run. So, and I can use some numbers here as well, but if you think 100 years ago, a 1 year salary was around $1,000. That was 50 ounces of gold. That 50 ounces of gold and 1 year salary would buy you 2 Ford T cars. Now, what is 50 ounces of gold is 95 to 100, 95,000, almost $100,000 dollars. Mm-hmm. That will buy you 2 cars, to what is considered, mid-level cars. You can buy 2 good cars for $100,000. So over time, precious metals keep that that purchasing power. I think silver is, of course, it's a very good option, although it's much more volatile. And it may be also, if you really pay attention to certain stocks of certain companies, normally stocks are correlated to the inflation, and think about companies that sell fast-moving consumer goods. You know, prices increase, they adjust their prices accordingly, and they follow pretty much the trend of devaluation. Yeah. But again, it's not a general rule that buy any stock and you are safe. No, you have to look at the different companies, even not different sectors only, but different companies within the same sector. Who would think that lumber would increase now 200% in the last year? Right. If someone would speculate on that. So maybe a few people did it. I didn't see it coming. Right.
I didn't either. So, well, Iustin, it's been great as always having you on. And I appreciate you for writing this information with some firsthand knowledge and to pass on to the viewers. So I'll definitely link this information because it's available on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. All my books are available on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll put the links down there, and of course, we had you on for Gold is Money, Gold Guys Money, and so I'll link to that video above as well. But Iustin Rosioara, it's been great connecting with you again. Looking forward to having you on, down the line, and we'll see what environment we're in there and see how we can try to, help other people navigate these choppy waters we're in. So once again, thanks for joining us on RTD Interviews, and looking forward to connecting you again.
Thank you so much, Mike.